this is a great Luncheon Society because it really deals with the challenges I face. Now, this is the remnants of my breakfast. It'll make Felicia proud. It is a combination of half cup oatmeal, half cup whole milk, quarter cup Greek yogurt, chia, and a little bit of syrup. Now we get to the bad news. It's this. This is what I washed it down with this morning. This is my crack cocaine. It is the bane of my existence. And although I have managed to get rid of Safeway cookies, ice cream, a lot of other crap, it's the sugar that's killing me. And I understand. I noticed that when I drink more, when I stress, and I'm in the middle of an RFP, a global RFP right now, and I'm kind of freaking out a bit because I'm working on all this stuff. And what do? I reach for the things that are common sins, and those common sins in this case are pizzas and soda. I've managed to keep away from the pizza, but the soda is killing me. And so that brings us where we are. And as we go through it, my wife is laughing. As we go through this post-pandemic period, we've all put on pounds that we've all wanted to do. We've all gone through stress. We've worried about our jobs. We've worried about our lives. Some folks on this call have had real serious brushes with the unspeakable. And now we seem to be coming out of it, even though we're dealing with new crises globally. So what I like about Dean's approach is this. He takes a holistic approach to lifestyle management, which is inclusive of eating well. It's not, you're not sitting there weighing salad on some sort of mythical scale. He asks the questions that are very important. It's not only what are you eating? Are you happy? Are you moving? Are you doing the things that you need to do so that when you are in your 70s and 80s and 90s and beyond, you can do it with a sense of purpose, gusto, and resilience. And so what we normally do on these things is we have Dean kick off the book for about 5 or 10 minutes tops. And then from then on, it's Q&A. Now, to make sure that we're not chatting over each other, go to the chat function, put your name in the chat box, and that'll form a queue. And with that, Dean, thank you so much for joining us again.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here and with all of you. So let me just start by giving an overview of my 44 years of work in 5 or 10 minutes. I'm a professor of medicine at UCSF and founded the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute. But I actually began doing research when I was a medical student, and I was learning how to do bypass surgery with Michael DeBakey, the heart surgeon who was one of the people who invented it. And he was really old school. He was the kind of guy who would stick your fingers with a needle if you didn't move them fast enough out of the operating field, sort of thing. And he said, "What year are you, son?" I said, "Well, I'm just starting my 3rd year." He goes, "Damn, it's going to be so much harder to bust you out of here with all these weird ideas you have." And actually, just as a short digression, he called me about 3 years ago. I hadn't talked to him in decades. And he said, "Hey, Dean, this is Mike DeBakey." And I recognized he had a very distinctive Louisiana accent. And I said, "To what do I owe this honor?" He said, "Well, you remember when you were my medical student and I used to give you such a hard time for those weird ideas you had?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I remember really well." He goes, "That's what's kept me alive all these years." He said, "I'm 99 years old. I'm about to die. And I just thought you'd like to know that my wife got interested in your work and I've been doing it and it's really worked well. So, if you live long enough, you just never know." And so what I've been able to show over the last 4 decades is that we've been using these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be. I often think it has to be a new drug or laser or something really high-tech, expensive, device, surgical procedure to be powerful. And I think our unique contribution is to use these very high-tech, state-of-the-art measures to show how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be. And over the last decades, we've shown that these same lifestyle changes can, everything we've done had never been done before. We showed that they could reverse heart disease for the first time. When we started doing this work in the late 70s, it was thought that once you had heart disease, it could only get worse, and at best you could slow it down, much as people think about Alzheimer's today. We found that bigger changes could actually stop or often reverse its progression. Instead of getting worse and worse, people get better and better. And then we found these same lifestyle changes could reverse, in many cases, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. When people are put on drugs to lower their cholesterol or blood pressure or blood sugar, and they ask, doctor, how long do I have to take these? What does the doctor usually say? Like forever. And when I was an intern, I had this cartoon drawn for one of my books that showed these doctors busily mopping up the floor around a sink that's overflowing, but nobody was reaching over to turn off the faucet. Like, how long do I have to mop up the floor? Like forever. Well, why don't we turn off the faucet? And in other words, when we treat the cause, in this case, our lifestyle, that our bodies often have a remarkable capacity to begin healing, and much more quickly than we had once realized. So we also found that so many people who are put on drugs to lower their cholesterol, their blood pressure, their blood sugar, under their doctor's care, and I want to emphasize that you shouldn't change any medications on your own, but many people can reduce or in some cases get off of these medications completely that they had been told they'd have to take forever. We also found, we did a randomized trial with Peter Carroll when he was the chair of urology at UCSF, and Bill Fair when he was the chair of urology at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, that these same lifestyle changes may slow, stop, and often even reverse the progression of men who have early stage prostate cancer. And what's true for prostate cancer will likely be true for breast cancer. And Dr. Laura Esserman, who runs the Breast Cancer Center at UCSF, and I've been planning to do a study for some time to see if that's true. And we found that when you change your lifestyle, it actually changes your genes. It turns on the genes that keep you healthy and turns off the genes that cause us to get sick. Hundreds of genes in just 3 months. We found over 500 genes were changed. We also found in a study we did with, and we published that study with Craig Venter when he was one of the first people to decode the human genome. And then we did a study with Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomeres, the ends of our chromosomes that regulate cellular aging. And they're kind of often compared to the plastic tip on the end of a shoelace that keeps your shoelace from unraveling. They're like the tips on the end of our DNA that keep our DNA from unraveling. And over time, as our DNA replicates, the telomeres tend to get shorter. And as our telomeres get shorter, our lives get shorter. And the risk of premature death from a wide variety of conditions goes up proportionate, pretty much all these chronic diseases. And she had done studies with Alyssa Epple showing that chronic emotional stress can make your telomeres get shorter faster. She did a study of women who were taking care of kids with autism and found when they compared the high stress and low stress women, there was a 9 to 17 year shortening of their lifespan in the high stress women, proportional to the degree of shortening of their telomeres. Smoking makes your telomeres get shorter faster, being sedentary, eating junk food, and so on. So we met and I said, if bad things make your telomeres shorter, maybe good things make them longer. And so we did a study together about 13 years ago, and we found, sure enough, that we published the first study showing that anything, in this case, these same lifestyle changes could lengthen telomeres. And when we published this, the Lancet editors sent out a press release and they called it the first study showing that lifestyle changes may reverse aging at a cellular level, which I thought was a nice way to put it. And we're now in the middle of doing the first randomized trial to see if these same lifestyle changes can stop or reverse the progression of men and women who have early stage Alzheimer's disease. And I have a personal interest in Alzheimer's because my mom and all of her siblings died of it. My mom was brilliant, and it was just such a tragedy to watch her mind decay. And I have one of the genes for it. And when you lose your memories, you lose everything. And there are currently no drugs that can stop it from getting worse. At best, you can slow it down a bit. There's only been one drug that's even been approved in the last 20 years, and that was last year, a drug called aducanumab. And there was a lot of controversy around it because one study showed it didn't do anything. The other showed at best it slowed it down a bit. But a third of the people get brain hemorrhages or brain swelling. It costs over $50,000 a dose. But it just shows you how desperate people are for a sense of hope. And I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's very reminiscent of where we were with heart disease 40 some odd years ago. In other words, back then, the less intensive intervention slowed down the rate at which our arteries got clogged. We found a more intensive one could unclog them to some degree. And here again, we know now that less intensive interventions slow down the rate of getting Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. What's good for your heart is good for your brain. We were hoping that a more intensive one might stop or even reverse it. And the UnDo It book that Bob talked about just came out in paperback a couple of months ago, and it puts forth this radical. Thank you. It put forth this radical unifying theory that is, why is it with all this talk about personalized medicine that these same lifestyle changes can reverse so many different chronic diseases? It wasn't like there was one set of diet and lifestyle changes for heart disease, a different one for diabetes, a different one for prostate cancer, whatever, is the same for all of them. Why is that? And I realized that even though I was trained, like all doctors, to view heart disease and diabetes and prostate cancer and so on as being fundamentally different diseases and diagnoses and treatments, that in many ways, they're the same disease, just manifesting and masquerading in different forms because they all share the same underlying biological mechanisms, things like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome, the 100 trillion cells we have living in our gut, changes in overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system and immune function and telomeres and gene expression and so on. And each one of these mechanisms in turn is directly influenced by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have. Eat well, move more, stress less, love more. The book begins with one of my favorite quotes, which is from Einstein. It says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So I've really tried to reduce it down to its essence. And I think that Alzheimer's may be the latest version of that. We're still recruiting patients for the study. We're doing it in collaboration with heads of neurology at Harvard and Mass General and University of California, San Diego, and Renown, as well as in the Bay Area. We provide 21 meals a week for the patients and their spouse or support person for the 40 weeks of the study. And so if you or anyone knows someone who may be interested, and they can live pretty much anywhere in the country because we do the intervention by Zoom and we send them the food, just go to my website, which is my name, ornish.com. And it radically simplifies our understanding of these things and hopefully makes it simpler. So having said that, just to show you, to put a human face on this, you mentioned Dr. Troy Hertz. Dr. Troy Hertz is an internal medicine doctor himself who had a massive heart attack after a horrible car crash, and it damaged so much of his heart that it was pumping so poorly that he was told the only thing that could save his life would be to get a new heart, a heart transplant. And it takes a while to find someone to donate their heart. You usually have to someone who's gotten killed on a motorcycle or whatever. So he decided to go through. Medicare created a new benefit category to cover my reversing heart disease program in 2010. And so we've been training hospitals and clinics and physician groups around the country since then. And it's working. We're getting bigger changes in lifestyle, better clinical outcomes, bigger cost savings, better adherence than anyone's ever shown. But you have to live within driving distance of one of the sites. And last November, just a few months ago, Medicare agreed to cover my reversing heart disease program when it's offered via Zoom anywhere in the country. So now we can reach people who live in rural areas or food deserts or whatever and help reduce health inequities and health disparities. But anyway, so Dr. Troy Hertz decided to go through my reversing heart disease program at UCLA, where he lived, to get in better shape for the surgery while they were looking for a donor. But his heart improved so much in just 9 weeks that it was able to pump so much better, he didn't need a heart transplant anymore. And he called me a couple months ago after I hadn't talked to him for a couple of years, and he said that his latest test showed that his heart's pumping even better. So what's the more radical intervention, a heart transplant or, eat well, move more, stress less, love more? Not to mention that a heart transplant is well over $1 million and you have to take immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of your life. So let me share my screen with you. This is only a minute and a half long, but I think it's a kind of a nice way to talk about and show how powerful these simple lifestyle changes can be.
So the situation I'm describing here is of an internal medicine doctor who started a new chapter in his life with his wife, moving to Lake Arrowhead, having just opened a private practice office after all of our kids went to college and we could relocate. And just as this was ramping up, we had a horrible car accident which precipitated a heart attack that dropped my cardiac functioning down to basically 11 to 13 or 14, 15% of what it should have been, which resulted in intractable chest pain, angina, trouble breathing, inability to walk from room to room, go upstairs without being carried. I was offered a heart transplant as the only way to stay alive. And at the 11th hour, I entered the Ornish program, which provided me with an entire paradigm shift with respect to stress management, exercise, diet, nutrition. And despite not believing it myself and having other physicians who didn't believe in it either, it worked beyond my wildest dreams. I'm now able to exercise moderately. I can work full time. I can live at 6,000 feet. And our quality of life is actually better than it was before.
So again, that's what after doing this work for so many decades, that's why I'm still so passionate about it, because it's just so wonderful to be able to empower people with information that can transform their lives to this degree, which is really exciting. This is the cartoon I was telling you about earlier about how we spend so much time mopping up the, oh, sorry, I stopped sharing here. Let me bring it back up here. Here we go. This is the cartoon I was telling you about before. We spend so much time mopping up the floor without also turning off the faucet. The other thing is that, and then I'll stop and open up for questions, is that there are a couple of studies that came out just a few months ago that looked at the effect of these lifestyle changes on COVID-19. And in one study, they looked at almost 3,000 frontline healthcare workers, people who were exposed to COVID pretty much every day, all day, in 6 countries, including ours. And they found those that ate a whole foods plant-based diet, which is part of our program, had a 73% lower risk of getting moderate to severe COVID-19. Those had a pescatarian, those had basically plant-based with fish, were 59% lower. And those eating a high animal protein diet, Atkins, paleo, keto cut diet, were 400% more likely to get moderate to severe COVID. And then another study that looked at 600,000 people in the US, that was out of the US in London. It was from the Harvard School of Public Health with Walter Willett and the King's College in London. Those that were eating a plant-based, whole foods plant-based diet were 43% less likely to get moderate to severe COVID. And so, as you know, that even if you're triple vaccinated, it doesn't keep you from getting it. So obviously we should all be vaccinated, but people are also saying, well, what else can I do to enhance my immune function? And this is one thing that can really help, along with all these other things we've been talking about. And finally, the program is essentially a whole foods plant-based diet that's low in fat and refined carbs, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, soy products, as close as possible as they can come in nature. Moderate exercise, like walking a half an hour a day or an hour 3 times a week, and some strength training. Various stress management techniques derived from yoga, like meditation and stretching and breathing techniques. And love more, spend more time with your friends and family and loved ones, or we use support groups to help to recreate that. So let me stop here. I know I've covered a lot of stuff, and just open it up to whatever is most interesting to you.
Sure, and we'll get going. And I'm watching my wife furiously write down notes, which means I'm totally busted. So we'll start off with the 2 doctors first, Irina, and then Nancy.
And let me just say one thing in response to that, because you've mentioned before about your what was it? I can't remember the word. You were sinning. That's what it was. Or bust. So much of the language around behavioral change has this kind of shaming, Nurse Ratched, bad quality. And I just find it to be so unproductive. I get accused of that all the time, of being like the food police. And nothing could be. I mean, what I've learned is that even more than being healthy, people want to feel free and in control. And as soon as I tell somebody, or someone else tells somebody, eat this, don't eat that, do this, don't do that, sometimes they get violent. And even if they otherwise would do it, just the fact that someone else wants them to do it causes them to feel so controlled that they stop doing it. This goes back to the first dietary intervention, when God said don't eat the apple, and that didn't go so well, and that was God talking. So I think there's a message there. And once you call foods good or bad, it's a very small step to saying I'm a bad person because I ate bad food, and then you might as well finish the pint of ice cream because you're a bad person, right? And it makes things worse. So I just say food is food, and if you're trying to reverse disease, it does take a pretty much all or nothing approach. But if you're just trying to stay healthy, lose a few pounds, get your cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugar under control, you can start by making moderate changes. And if that's enough to accomplish your goals, great. If not, do more. What matters most in general is your overall way of eating and living. So if you indulge yourself one day, it doesn't mean you cheated or you failed or you're bad. Just eat healthier the next. You don't have time to, walk for an hour one day, do more the next. You don't have time to meditate for half an hour, do it for a minute. Whatever you do, there's a corresponding benefit. The more you change, the more you improve. But again, it's not all or nothing unless you're trying to reverse a life-threatening condition.
Irina, you're up.
Hi, Dean. We've met a few times.
Nice to see you again.
Also, yes, nice to see you too. And actually, as a matter of fact, I think last time was more than 10 years ago at one of the conferences. And I have to say, you look amazing. Didn't change a bit.
You say that to all the guys.
You're a walking proof, I have to say.
I'll be 69 in a few months.
Wow, that's quite impressive. So you are obviously walking your talk, so to speak. So good for you. Yeah. Well, I guess my question is, you partially already answered it. So that, I mean, there are so many different diets. There are so many different fabs. I mean, like you do this, you do that, intermittent fasting, so low sugar, this and that. I mean, and they all kind of sometimes contradict each other, 10 years later, and etc. So I'm just curious, is there any one particular intervention through your research, and of course you collaborate with so many amazing people, that you find the most effective? I mean, I know like University of Berkeley have been doing a lot of study on low sugars and etc. So for the centennial cells and etc. So, but I'm just kind of curious if there is like one particular intervention that people should consider doing, so to make a huge change.
Yeah, well, I think, again, there's so much conflicting nutritional information out there. And the reason that I spend so much of my adult life doing these research studies is that I think properly done, collaborating with the best people, as you indicated, and publishing the top tier medical journals can help clarify what works and what doesn't, and for whom and under what circumstances. And often in our case, redefine what's possible for people. And by doing so, can give, at this point, millions of people new hope and new choices they didn't have before, which is great. But it's not just one thing. People often ask, since I've been doing studies, well, you're changing all these things at the same time. How do you know what's doing what? And the answer is we don't really. But unlike most things we do as doctors, the only side effects of each of these components are good ones. And we know there's independent evidence to support that, diet, exercise, stress management, and social support are all important. But for any given individual, it'll depend. For someone who's really stressed out, who's got a kid with autism, let's say, then the stress management may be more important. For someone who's eating a pretty awful diet, then changing diet may be more important. And besides that, there's a synergy that comes when you change a lot of things at the same time. There was a study that came out in looking at dementia, not Alzheimer's, but just regular dementia, that Jim Blumenthal published last year. And he found diet alone didn't really slow it down, didn't stop it. Exercise alone didn't. But when you did them together, there was a synergy that it actually had an impact that neither one separately could do. And so, in doing these studies, you're never really just changing one thing anyway, even if you think you are. You may say, well, we're just doing exercise alone, but invariably when people start to exercise, they start to eat better, they exercise in a group, they have the social support, they become more, it's harder to smoke when you're exercising. So our approach is saying, taken as a whole, these interventions cause these improvements, but we can't really parse out the relative contribution or say, what's the most important. I think it's all important.
It's a combination. Is it somewhat similar to the blue zone idea, do you think, your approach?
Well, Dan Buettner is a good friend, and his is more on the macro level, looking at whole populations of people. My mentor at Harvard, Alex Leaf, actually started that work 40 years ago, looking at populations that live longer. And they do share these same qualities. They tend to eat healthy. They have a strong social support or spiritual support. They exercise either as for fun or because they have jobs that cause them to get exercise, and they have strong social networks. And they, it's a common pattern that you see in societies throughout the world where they tend to live a long time.
With that, we'll go to Nancy, then Roger, then Bobby Wasserman. Nancy, you're up.
Thank you. Hi, Dean. We've actually crossed paths many times. Mutual friends, Al Bonetta, Rachel Remen, Lipsenthal, John Patterson.
Yeah, Al Bonetta used to manage John Prine, who.
Well, I met Al through John. John was a really good friend too.
Oh, is that right? Well, you'll appreciate this. When I was in college, I worked my way through school as a photographer, and I was a stringer for Rolling Stone, which meant I got to go to all the rock concerts for free. And I got to interview John Prine. This was in 1973, and I still remember that. So anyway. Apropos of nothing, but I just became a real John Prine fan after that.
Well, and Al was certainly a huge Dean Ornish fan. So,
thank you.
So anyway, I'm a pediatrician here in San Francisco, and we're coming into our 20th year now of a nonprofit that I started to work with lifestyle nutrition with Native Americans. And the focus is a week bringing them here to San Francisco, originally all from Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, but other places too, And it's literally an immersion project, because besides focusing on food, mindfulness, yoga, that they swim in the bay every day, and they finish their week with a swim from Alcatraz.
Amazing.
It is amazing. It's actually extraordinary. And we do everything from, like, we prepare the first meal, but they prepare all the meals after that, so that they're literally going home with the knowledge in their fingertips, as it were. But my question is, we've had, of course, Pine Ridge is the poorest county in the United States. There's real food desert beyond belief, and immense poverty. And we haven't yet found, we've worked some on what can they do when they get home, but it's still very hard. Even with helping them start gardens, we get them cooking equipment, snack equipment, gift certificates to stores in Rapid City, which are 100 miles away. But I'm just wondering what success you've had with helping people once they're back home to maintain nutrition and lifestyle changes.
Yeah, well, the thing that I think is the most helpful in helping people make lifestyle changes is a support group. Because many people, what I've learned is that information alone is not enough to motivate most people to make lasting changes in behavior. I mean, if it were, nobody would smoke. It's not like I'd say, hey, guess what? Did you know smoking is bad for you? And go, gee, I didn't know that. I'll quit today. It's like everybody knows it's bad for them. It's on every package of cigarettes. And Nancy, I'm sure you see this with your patients as well. And it's not enough to focus on the behavior, but to say, what is it? Why are we doing what we're doing? First of all, I think it's wonderful that you're working with Native Americans. I want to just applaud you for that. And I've learned that the real epidemic in our culture, and I think this is also true with many Native Americans that I've met, is not just physical heart disease, but what I call emotional or spiritual heart disease, the sense of loneliness and isolation and depression that is also in part a function of the breakdown of the social networks that used to give us a strong sense of connection and community. 50 years ago, most of us had a neighborhood that we grew up in where we knew our neighbors. We had a extended family we saw regularly. We had a job or a school or a club or a mosque or a temple or whatever that we went to regularly, or a job that we've been at for 10 years or more. And many people don't have any of those now. And study after study have shown that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely from virtually all causes when compared to those who have a strong sense of love and connection and community. And I don't know anything in medicine that has that kind of impact. And so when I'd ask people, in our studies, because I got to know them really well, I'd say, teach me something. Why do you smoke? Why do you overeat? Why do you drink too much? Why do you abuse opioids? Why do you, play too many video games? These behaviors seem so maladaptive to me. And they look at me, they go, you don't get it. You don't have a clue, Dean. These behaviors aren't maladaptive. They're very adaptive because they help us deal with our underlying pain and loneliness and depression. I was suicidally depressed when I was in college and came very close to doing that. And so I'm much more tuned into that than I would have been otherwise. And people often say things like, food fills that void, or fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain, or alcohol numbs the pain. And certainly Native Americans have a major issue with alcohol in many of the places, and understandably so. We have an opioid epidemic that people use to numb the pain, or they play too many video games, more money spent on video games than movies these days, or they work all the time, which we've all done as a way of distracting ourselves from our pain. So it's not, again, not to just give information or focus on the behavior, but we can work at that deeper level, and we can help people create communities. And so our support groups are not helping people stay on the diet, which is what a lot of people think. They're trying to recreate that sense of connection and community where someone can feel, if you grow up in a neighborhood of 2 or 3 generations of people, they really know you. They know when you messed up. They know your dark side. They know when you got busted. They know when you broke that window, or you were suicidal, whatever it was. And that they know, and they know that that they know, and they're still there for you. It's kind of like an Avatar in that wonderful movie from James Cameron. I see you. I see all of you. Whereas one of the studies that my wife Ann and I quote in our new UnDo It book is that the more time you spend on Facebook, the more depressed you are, because it's not a real authentic intimacy. It's people only show their best selves. Here I am in front of the Eiffel Tower, and here I am with my perfect, family or whatever. And it looks like everybody has this perfect life but you, and so by recreating a sense of safety where people can talk about authentically what's really going on in their lives and what they're really feeling, it's a part of our program that people often have the hardest time with. Like, okay, I get the diet and the exercise, but the love more, what's that about? Well, this is what it's about. That when we can help create that sense of safety, people, even on Zoom, can connect to the deepest levels. And it's so meaningful. And then we find that they're much more likely to make and maintain lifestyle choices that are life enhancing than ones that are self-destructive. My wife, Ann, was the first to show me this could be done on Zoom 9 years ago when we were doing this with our prostate cancer study. And I was surprised because I thought, it has to be done in person. I was wrong. And so what I would suggest that you do, if you haven't already, is to create a virtual support group via Zoom or whatever technology they have, and meet regularly and use that as a way of helping people, not only by focusing on, exchanging recipes and that kind of thing, but also working at this deeper level, which is really, to me, where the lifestyle changes can become meaningful. And because of that, 94% of the people finish the 72 hours of our reversing heart disease program that Medicare is paying for. I mean, it's insane, because when you work at that level, it's so meaningful that people really are much more, they have less need to have self-destructive behaviors and more of a sense of control over their lives and can make healthier choices.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. And we have, of course, done a lot of that. And they're, during the week that they're here, they're all even staying in the same home. And the staying in touch, I'm working on a book project now, and the 97 people came forth to do interviews by Zoom over the summer, previous participants. There's also such a deep level of poverty, both spiritual poverty, because the families and communities were shattered by, now there's all the native boarding, the forced boarding school history and that, but that, in a sense, we're spitting in the ocean. And we've done some successful work with having like support Zoom groups, that kind of thing. But then somebody's killed in a car accident, their internet's out because their power's out. The poverty is just, it's so enormous. And so, and even when they're like committed to having good meals at home, they can't necessarily access. For months last year, there was no grocery store on Pine Ridge. So there was nowhere to get food.
Well, I'm not in any way trying to minimize the issues. And that's why what you're doing is so important. But at the same time, anything that brings us together is really healing. Even the word healing comes from the root to make whole. Yoga is from the Sanskrit to yoke, to unite, to bring together. And so the support groups that we do are really focused on just creating a safe place, because you can only be intimate to the degree you can be emotionally vulnerable, and you can only do that to the degree that you feel safe. And so, what goes in the group stays in the group, creating that sense of trust. And if people can't afford a laptop or an iPhone or something, maybe they can, you can have a shared one or maybe if you have grant support, they can help provide that for people. But I just find that without in any way trying to minimize the horrible difficulties and certainly the horrible history that so many Native Americans have had, that's really the opportunity to really make a difference by bringing them together in a safe way that you're uniquely positioned to do.
Thanks. Yeah.
And with that, before we move to Roger, I have a question. Good ideas often take time to find their way into the mainstream. When you started off with this approach, even Dr. DeBakey said, "Oh, this is nonsense. It's I can cut my way to better health. I can surgically find a better way to extend your life." Walk us through how it was at the beginning, and then also walk us through where it began to find traction within mainstream acceptance.
Yeah, well, I can answer that in two different levels. One is with DeBakey, for example. We'd cut people open, we'd bypass their clogged arteries, he'd tell them they were cured, and they go home and they'd often just do all the things that had caused the problem in the first place. They'd eat junk food and smoke and not manage stress, not exercise. And all too often we'd cut them open again, sometimes 2 or 3 times. And so for me, bypass surgery became a metaphor of an incomplete approach, that we were literally bypassing the problem without also treating the cause. And so I went to these things that we used to have back then. This was in 1977 called libraries, and had these things called books and journals, and got really obsessed with it. I was a second-year medical student. I learned that, in dogs and cats and pigs and rabbits and monkeys, you could cause them to get heart disease if you stress them out or put them on a typical American diet or made them smoke, which you can do actually, and made them not able to exercise. And you could reverse it if you change those things. And I kept saying, well, why should people be any different? And they said, they just are, And one of the nice things about being a second-year medical student is you're not really indoctrinated enough to know what's really possible or not. And so, fools rush in and all that. And plus, as I mentioned earlier, I was suicidally depressed when I was in college and came about as close to doing that, to doing myself in as you can without actually doing it. And having gone through that and these same lifestyle changes, it's a longer story that we probably have time for now, but I'm happy to elaborate on it if anybody wants me to, really changed my life and helped me realize that, I mean, at the time I thought I was at Rice University in Houston, and half the student body graduated first or second in their class in high school. And I felt like they'd made a big mistake in letting me in. And now that I was with a bunch of really smart kids, it was just a matter of time before they figured out what a big mistake they made in letting me in. And my college roommate was one of the 4 kids that year who scored a perfect score on his SATs. And I had this organic chemistry professor who was like the professor from hell. He said, look to your right and look to your left, and one of you won't be here at the end of the semester. And, this is the most important course for getting into medical school. And I really thought I had to get into medical school so I could, love myself and be a good person. And so I just remember thinking one day, like, why didn't I just kill myself? It's dead people look peaceful, and I felt anything but peaceful. I couldn't even, I was up for a week straight without even being able to sleep at all, and couldn't even read a headline in the newspaper and tell you a minute later what it said. And I was all set to do that and got such a bad case of mononucleosis that I didn't have the energy to even get out of bed. And my parents got word I was really a mess, saw what a mess I was, went home to Dallas. And my plan was to get strong enough to kill myself, as insane as that sounds. And meanwhile, my older sister, this was in January of 1973, had been a child of the 60s. And there was an ecumenical spiritual teacher named Swami Satchidananda who'd really helped turn her life around. So when the Swami came to Dallas, my parents decided to have a cocktail party for him to thank him for helping their daughter, my sister, which was, I'm sure, really weird back in 1973 in Dallas, having a Swami over your house. Today it'd be weird in Dallas, but it's especially weird back then. So there's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And so in walks this central castings idea of what a Swami should look like, long white beard and saffron robes and the whole bit. And he started out by giving a lecture in our living room and started out by saying that nothing can bring lasting happiness, which I'd already figured out, which is why I was ready to do myself in. Except I looked at him and he's glowing and I'm ready to kill myself. And I was like, what am I missing here? And he went on to say what really turned my life around. And it's so easy to make fun of, like a Marin County New Age cliche, but he said nothing can bring us lasting happiness, but we have it already if we don't disturb it. And that not being mindful of that, we run after all these things and think, oh, if only I had more whatever. In my case, if only I could get into medical school, if only I had more money or power or sex or beauty or accomplishment, whatever, then I'd be happy. Then people would love me. Then I wouldn't feel so lonely. And then everything would be great. And he said, once you set up that view of the world, however it turns out, and by the way, our whole advertising industry and so much of our culture reinforces that perspective. If you just buy this thing or get this thing, then you'll be happy. That until you get it, you're stressed, you're not happy. And the stress, we talked earlier about the stress isn't just what you do, it's how you react to what you do. But if you believe that, I'm a winner if I get this and I'm a loser if I don't, then the stresses go way up and the stakes go way up. If you don't get it, you're stressed. If someone else gets it, then you're really stressed, and it kind of reinforces this zero-sum game, dog-eat-dog view of the world that many of us have. The more you get, the less it is for me. And even if you get it, it's very seductive in the moment because it's like, I got it, now I'm happy. But it doesn't last. It's soon followed either by now what, it's never enough, or so what, big deal. It doesn't provide that lasting sense of meaning. And one patient said the letdown that came from accomplishing a goal was so great, I always made sure I had a dozen projects going at the same time. I could just immediately shift my focus. And what the Swami taught me was that, and what maybe one of the ultimate ironies is that when in the process of running after all these things that we think we need to be happy and peaceful, we end up disturbing our own innate happiness and peace that we would have already if we just stopped doing that. In fact, I titled the latest book, Undo It, in homage to him, because he liked to make puns. People would say, what are you, a Hindu? He'd say, no, I'm an undo, that kind of thing. And so he said that the goal of all these spiritual practices like meditation, they don't bring you a sense of peace. And so often we think that they're like Valium in another form, that they make us peaceful. He said that you're already peaceful, that what they do is they help to quiet down our minds enough to experience that inner sense of peace and well-being. And then the question shifts from how can I get what I think I need to be happy and healthy to how can I stop disturbing what's already there? And if it's how can I get what I need, then everybody out there who has something that I think I need to be happy and healthy has power over me, and it can be very stressful. But if it's me, if it's like, what am I doing to disturb my own inner peace? I can do something about that, not to blame myself or flog myself, but to empower myself, because I can do something about that. And the question is, what am I doing to disturb my own inner peace? So at the end of a meditation, when I'm feeling more peaceful, is to remind myself again that that's my natural state. That's everyone's natural state until we disturb it. And then the paradox is, when I really thought that I had to get into medical school to be a good person, I couldn't even function. I couldn't do anything. And then when I started doing these things and kind of even glimpses of that, it really turned my whole life around, and went back to school, graduated first in my class, gave the baccalaureate, et cetera, et cetera. And I say that not to brag, but I had both ends of that spectrum. And the only thing that was different was me, that the situation didn't change, but I did. And one of the reasons why I love doing this work and working with people who have chronic diseases, that the chronic diseases is often just a Trojan horse. It's, that, yeah, they have heart disease, but they also are often lonely and depressed and isolated and so on. And when people are hurting, like I was, there's an opportunity for change, because change is hard. But if you can reach people when they're really hurting, it's like, well, that may be really hard. But boy, I'm hurting so much. Let me try this weird stuff. And again, that's part of the value of the research. It can empower people to say, well, if you're willing to make these changes, there's a good chance you're going to get better. And so anyway, a long-winded explanation of how I got interested in this. But so when I first started doing this work, there was a lot of resistance to it, because people that it's impossible. Well, the first study I did, I only had 10 men and women for a month, and the blood flow to their heart improved in 8 of the 10 people using what was then a new test called a thallium scan. They said, well, how do you know they wouldn't have gotten better anyway? You didn't have a randomized control group. I said, well, that's true, but how often do you see any of your patients getting better like that? Well, that's beside the point, that kind of thing. So over time, we did randomized trials, we published them in all the leading journals. Ultimately it took 16 years, but Medicare agreed to cover my program. When you change reimbursement, you change medical practice and even medical education. And so it's a slow process, but that's part of, as the Swami would say, that's why they build temples on hills with lots of steps. That's you appreciate it more when you get there, when it's hard. I learned when I was in college, I could take all the meaning out of everything. That's why I got so depressed. But I also learned that I could imbue my life with meaning by, in many ways, choosing to do things that would be helpful to other people, or even just choosing not to eat certain foods or not to do certain things can imbue those choices with meaning.
A great answer. And I think that what I like about the answer is it sets the table for what came. And it also will set the table for a number of questions that are coming too. So Roger Bush, Bobby Wasserman, Judy Palnick, and then Judith Englehart. Roger,
Okay.
you're up.
I'll try to give shorter answers.
Thank you, Dean. First of all, I haven't thought of Swami Muktananda in a long,
It wasn't
long
Muktananda,
time.
it was Satchidananda, but they were brother monks.
Oh, okay. Because in Muktananda, I was with him at a lecture in the middle 70s that made me think of that. But my question may be in a way inappropriate, because it's a personal one that this week, my goddaughter's son, who's 31 years old, was designated with polycystic kidney disease. And I'm just wondering how on earth, and again, everyone is talking about very macro, which is wonderful, and the learning, the Luncheon Society programs are just so rich in that way. But in a specific way, other than reading your book and understanding it and then passing it along to my 31-year-old friend, any suggestions for polycystic disease, kidney disease?
Polycystic kidney disease, yeah. That's an area I don't have a lot of expertise in, but I do know that the same diet that I'm recommending is much easier for people to metabolize. And so sometimes people who are just started kidney dialysis were able to get off the dialysis because they had a lot less toxicity for the kidneys to get rid of. So I would, at a minimum, it can help in that regard. But that's really all I can say. It's certainly worth trying all these things because they work for so many other things that it may work for that. I have no idea, but it would be worth trying because certainly it'll make it easier on his kidneys because there's a lot less toxic waste to get rid of.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bobby Wasserman, you're up.
Okay, great. Hi. I have a question on if there are any studies or observations on the changes in healthier eating coming from the pandemic, where people were cooking more and able to control the ingredients, even though it might not be the greatest of choices, it was made better by cooking it at home in more controlled environment.
In general, people's diets have gotten worse during the pandemic, and they've gained weight because of the social isolation, and they just feel bad, and they use, it's like, I think I had a well-known food writer say, when I get depressed, I eat a lot of fat. It coats my nerves and numbs the pain, and food fills that void, and so unfortunately, for most people, it's actually caused their diets to get worse.
Are people moving back to a healthier diet? Have you seen or observed anything that people are shifting back, or are they just kind of stuck?
I don't know. I think it's, just people are just now beginning to get back to going out again. So I think it's probably too early to tell, but it's an interesting question.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Before we go on to the next person, let me just kind of follow up on Bobby's question a little bit. Do you find that there are times or epochs in people's lives that they begin to rethink their dietary choices? Let's say, for example, they are beginning to see the oats of their mortality as they hit 60, as you see your peers around you who aren't doing so well, or is there a point in their 20s or 30s where they begin to think about this type of better approach, or this type of holistic approach to better health, which includes better diet, better social connections, moving more and the like?
Yeah, let me just expand on what I said earlier, which is that, fear is not really a sustainable motivator. For a month or two after someone's had a heart attack or a diagnosis of a bad disease, they'll do pretty much anything that their doctor or their nurse or dietitian says, but only for about 4 to 6, maybe 8 weeks, then they stop. Because we all, the mortality rate is still 100%. It's 1 per person. We all know we're going to die, but it's not something we think about most of the time. So I've just found that efforts to motivate people to change out of fear of dying or fear of something really horrible, like a heart attack or stroke, don't work very well. Statins, for example, cholesterol-lowering drugs, are a proven benefit in people with heart disease, but half of the people who are, half to 2/3 of the people who are prescribed them don't take it. 25% of them never even fill their prescription. And it's just taking a pill once a day. And yet, as I mentioned, 94% of the people, 96% of people actually finish our program after 72 hours. That's a way bigger commitment than taking a pill. And the reason is that the pill doesn't make you feel better, but the lifestyle changes do. And when someone is suffering, there's a doorway, an opportunity for real transformation that I, as a doctor, wasn't trained to take advantage of. I was trained to literally bypass or figuratively bypass or numb or kill or whatever the pain as quickly as possible, rather than helping people connect the dots between when they suffer and why. So the suffering itself can be a doorway or as a catalyst for transformation. I can't tell you how many patients have said things to me. I remember the first time somebody said, Dean, having a heart attack was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I said, what, are you nuts? And they say, no, that's what it took to get my attention, to begin making these changes that have made my life so much better and so much more meaningful that I never would have done otherwise. I'm rediscovering inner sources of peace and joy and well-being. My relationships are getting better. I'm feeling better. All these things really, make a big difference in my life. I used to get in these arguments with Al Gore when An Inconvenient Truth came out. A friend of mine, Lawrence Bender, was one of the people who made the film. And, I said, you can't mobilize people over a long period of time if you tell them the earth is going to melt down in 10 years. It's too frightening for people to, it'll get people's attention, but they won't be able to maintain it. We have to talk about other things that are really more immediate and more, empowering. And there's a wonderful film that came out that I highly recommend called The Game Changers, that Luis Sahoyos and James Cameron did together. And they basically filmed all these elite athletes who raised their athletic performance when they went on a plant-based diet. They became the mixed martial artist national champion, or the Tennessee Titans won the Super Bowl for the first time, or Dotsie Bausch at the age of almost 40 got an Olympic medal in cycling, one of the most demanding Olympic sports. But there's a scene in there of these 3 guys, these 3 athletes in their mid-20s probably, and they gave them a single meat-based meal. And then they measured the frequency and hardness of erections they got at night when they slept. And guys get erections when they sleep. It's a normal function. And then they did the same thing a day later with a single plant-based meal. First they did the meat-based meal, then they did the plant-based meal, and then they measured the same thing. And in all three cases, they had 300 to 500% more frequent erections and 10 to 15% harder erections after the plant-based meal than the meat-based meal. Now, I've been writing for years that even a single meal can affect blood flow to your brain, but it can affect blood flow to all your body, including your sexual organs. And, The Game Changers is now the most downloaded documentary in history. They have 100 million downloads, in part because of scenes like that. It's kind of like what Elon Musk did for driving, where before you had a choice between a wimpy car that didn't pollute or a Ferrari that, kind of a muscle car that did. And now you can have a car that's faster than a Ferrari that doesn't pollute at all. And so the same way that the Game Changers films make it more aspirational for people to change their lifestyle, not just out of fear because they went through something bad recently.
That we've got Judy Palnick, Judy Engelhardt, Bradley, and Gillian. Judy Palnick, you're up. You're on mute. You're on mute, dear.
It turned out that according to the Guinness Book of World Records, the most commonly used phrase last year was "you're on mute."
Which was true. I was like having this whole thing. I said first, just on the whole Swami Bhaktananda was a very popular person in the group that much of them. There was like the drug kids, and then there were the what do you call them? I guess the more spiritual
bliss nannies.
Yeah, and they were always trying to drag me to go over to the Swami side of things. So anyways, neither here nor there, but anyways, I absorbed some of it, I hope, maybe not at that time. But my question was, because I came in a little bit late, but you were talking more about heart and changing conditions and whatever. And I just, during all this, there's a colleague of mine who's really suffering from the panic attacks and whatever, something which I know nothing about. And, it's not in my experience. I'd rather kill someone than kill myself. It's just my personality. So I just was wondering, is this sort of program, maybe, is this something he could join up? Sounds like it might help him.
Well, it might. I don't know. I mean, certainly meditation and other practices like that can help quiet down someone's mind and help them rediscover inner sources of peace and joy and well-being. The panic often comes from feeling like you're not going to be able to get something you think you need. And so, as for reasons we talked about probably before you came in, but maybe you can get a copy of this recording. We talked at length about how these practices can help people become more inwardly defined and rediscover inner sources of peace and well-being. So I would certainly be worth a try.
And to be somewhat a little bit, he's at Kaiser. Is something like your program or attending or doing something like that? Is that like covered by any kind of insurance? I hate to be really crass, but
yeah, it's covered by Medicare, but not for panic attacks. It's only covered for people with heart disease at this time.
Okay.
But you can also pay out of pocket for it. Then they will always discount it a lot if you do that.
Right.
And it's all done by Zoom, so you can do it, in your own home now.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bradley, you're up.
By the way, the money doesn't go to me. It's but that's why they do it.
It was fine about any doctor's fees. I'm married to a doctor who poo-poos most of anything that I say about this kind of stuff, or any of his patients that come in with anything holistic, plant-based. He says, you need to be down the road.
I hear you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bradley, you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ornish. It's really great interacting with you one-to-one with Bob's Luncheon Society. And I think I mentioned that Rob is a really good friend of mine. And so I watched him through this whole episodic journey of his over the last few years. And his recovery has been really miraculous. And depressingly,
what did you notice with him?
Well, I was visiting him in the hospital as he was having his 3 different heart attack stages, and his tiredness and his illness and his being overweight. And, you know, he lost 40 pounds. He's got tons of energy. He is alive, healthy, sexually active, vibrant. You know, he's tall, bigger and taller than I am, and weighs less than I do. And I think I'm in good shape.
I'm so glad to hear that. I remember him saying that. He said, I've had dead patients who look better than I did when I started this.
Yeah, he said that to me as well. Yeah. So depressingly, I love eating meat. I love having a couple or more cocktails a night. And when I hear his story, and I think the thing that really has had a huge impact on him is Claudia, his wife, is a real sergeant about it all. Because I think he's as lenient as I tend to be on my own, but she keeps him pretty steady, and I think that he feels that that's probably really an important component, is to have somebody by your side who's helping you stay the true course. And
it's true.
You know, I feel like as I turn 65 this year, I'm coming into my own health issues and are already into some of them, and so this is really wanting to embrace what you're doing, and yet kind of struggling with my willpower and say, well, how do I, Rob doesn't drink, maybe once in a while has a glass of wine, he eats no meat. And so I guess, I don't know, I just.
So what is the question? So just to make sure I can answer your question, what is your question?
Do I have to stop drinking? Do I have to stop eating meat?
You don't have to do anything. You know, that's what I mentioned before, that as soon as you feel like you have to do something, then you're not going to want to do it, even if you otherwise might want to. I think there's a hierarchy of values, and that even more than being healthy, most people want to feel free and in control. And as soon as somebody says, don't do this and do that, you want to do the opposite, or like, watch me, you know. My Uncle Harry had a heart attack when I was a medical student, and he was smoking in the ICU. And I said, what's wrong with you? And basically it was like everybody was telling him, what's wrong with you? Quit smoking. And it was more important to him to feel like no, nobody tells me what to do. And he ended up dying just to prove that he was in control. So whatever you do, it has to come from you. And it has to be not because someone else wants you to do it, but because you want to do it. And again, you could do it because you want to live longer. If you can, you know, if it's meaningful, it's sustainable. And so if you can find, like, why do I want to live? And this is what I learned, you know, when I was suicidal. This is what Viktor Frankl wrote about in people who survived concentration camps in Nazi Germany. They weren't the strongest or healthiest. They were the ones who had the strongest sense of meaning and purpose. They would inevitably say something like, I had to survive so that I could, whatever, be reunited with my loved ones, or bear witness and write a book, or whatever it was. And as I mentioned before, if you can find the sense of meaning, like, why do I want to eat healthier? Well, I want to live longer. Well, why do you want to live longer? You know, what if you're telling somebody who's lonely and depressed that they're going to live longer, isn't always that motivating. I mean, you know, it's like, they're just trying to get through the day. And so you say, well, I want to live longer so that I can watch my kids grow up, you know, or whatever it is for you. Then suddenly now that's a whole different reason for making these changes. And then if you could then focus on the short-term benefits that you feel, that what you gain is so much more than what you give up. That's the other key message, is that it's not about preventing something. It's not about living to be 86 instead of 85. You know, Woody Allen once said, the only way you get to live to be 100 is by not doing all the things that would make you want to live to be 100. You know, that all the variations are, am I going to live longer? Is it just going to seem longer? And all the variations on those kinds of jokes. But it's about, oh, what I gain is more than what I give up. My sexual function after one meal improves. My chest pain goes away. You know, for someone like Bob Troyers, who couldn't walk, you know, had to be carried upstairs, and now he can go back to work and make love with his spouse and play with his kids and do all the things that make life worth living. He said, yeah, I like eating meat, but not that much. You know, what I gain is so much more than what I give up. So if you can find those kind of sense of equations for you, and because these biological mechanisms are so dynamic, most people feel so much better so quickly, it really reframes the whole reason for making these changes from fear of dying to joy of living.
Well said. Thank you.
Jillian, you're up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ornish. This is so interesting. First, I would mention that without having heard you, when the pandemic started, I took a decision just on my own. I live next to Central Park, and the gyms were closed and my friends were away, and I felt very isolated, but I just decided that every day I was going to take a 5-mile walk in Central Park. And here we are 2.5 years later. I have done it every day, including this afternoon before I tuned into this program. And I must say it was a saving grace. The light, the air, the movement. Occasionally I would see a familiar face, but mostly it was solitary. But it just, whatever it was in that kind of movement and being outdoors, I think quite literally got me through this, and in an odd way has made me feel younger and stronger.
Well, see, that's the whole point, is that yes, you may live longer, but you'll certainly live better. You know, you feel better. It helps you deal with the stresses of COVID. And you feel younger. You feel more energized. That's really when you can connect the dots between that behavior and that feeling, then it makes it much easier to continue it. Yeah. I mean, like I grew up in Texas where exercise was punishment. You know, go take a lap, you know, or give me 50 push-ups or whatever. But swimming was always fun. And my wife and I moved into a house a couple of years ago and has a lap pool in there. It's the first time I ever had a house with a swimming pool. And so I swim every morning and I love it, you know, because it has a different association for me. So you have to, it's kind of what you're describing as well.
Yeah, I bike and swim now and it's great. But my question is this: I've tried to move toward a plant-based diet, but I find I'm hungry. How do you get enough protein to keep your energy up?
Yeah, you can get plenty of protein. You get all the protein you need if you eat a well-balanced plant-based diet. And you may get hungry faster if you're not eating as much fat and sugar, because, but that's a good thing. I wrote a book years ago called Eat More, Weigh Less, because we found the average person in our study lost 24 pounds in the first year, even though we weren't limiting the amount of food they ate. They could eat as much as they want, and as often as they want. But because fat has 9 calories per gram and protein and carbs have only 4, when you eat less fat, you're eating less calories. Even if you're eating the same amount of food, it's the density of the calories that's much lower. So you can eat whenever you're hungry until you're full and you still lose weight. And you probably will eat, you know, snacks, you know, 2 or 3 snacks a day, as well as the 2 or 3 meals a day. But that's a good thing for most people. But you'll get all the protein you need as long as you eat a diversity of foods.
Is there a recipe book you can suggest for plant-based eating?
Well, as a matter of fact, I can. Any of those books, really. UnDo It has, I think, 75 recipes in there. All of my books, pretty much, with the exception of the Love and Survival book, all the books have recipes in there. And one of the things I learned is that the best way to make healthful food taste good is to work with, not with health food chefs, but with great chefs. So I commissioned Alice Waters, you know, from Chez Panisse in one of my earlier books, and Wolfgang Puck and Deborah Madison from Greens, and people like that. And so work within these guidelines, and the food can be, you know, delicious and nutritious.
Great.
I want to loop back to there's a great question that Judy Engelhardt had said, and then she kind of walked.
I want to address it, Bob.
Go for it.
Okay. Hi, Judy Engelhardt. I want to thank you. I really wasn't terribly interested in your talk, but I owed Bob to be part of this again. And you reminded me of all the good things I've done in my life. I've been meditating for 51 years. I used to be a vegetarian. I used to be a really good cook until COVID. I'm a widow, so I live by myself, but now I graze. I mean, there's no such thing as a meal to me when I'm home by myself. I eat when I'm hungry, but I don't always eat the right things.
Well, I'm glad I didn't live up to your expectations. That's good.
You exceeded my expectations.
There's a great song called Amazing Grace that you probably know. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I ordered your book from Bob, but I wanted to thank you for reminding me of all this stuff that I knew that I should be doing. And I've done it at different, I mean, I've never given up meditation, but I was only a vegetarian for 7 years. And I gave it up when I got pregnant. I thought I wasn't getting enough protein. And I never went back to being a vegetarian. I mean, I'm going back. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad. You know, when I started doing this work, I thought that the younger people who had less severe disease would do better, but I was wrong. It wasn't how old or how sick they were. The only thing that really mattered was the more they changed their lifestyle, the more they improved. And everything we measured, whether it was their amount of blockages in their arteries or their PSA levels or the length of their telomeres or the changes in their gene expression, the more you change, the more you improve at any age. So as long as you're alive and stable, it's never too late.
No, I know that. And I'm old, so that's good.
How old are you?
78. I'll be 79 this year.
Oh, that's not very old.
Great.
I Old is always 20 years older than I am, so you're fine.
I would say you're just a boy.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And with that, we'll move on to Arena, and then we'll move on to Mary Jo.
Dean, thank you so much. You're always such an enlightened presenter. So, and you go, of course, in such a multi-system approach that I greatly, greatly appreciate. Yeah, so we need that. My question is, of course, I'm a medical doctor, so, but I'm constantly being exposed, of course, to most innovative, more personalized approaches, right? So, I mean, let's just go and dig into our DNA based, so even our microbiome DNA, based personalized medicine. So, I mean, I see that a big part of medicine is actually going towards more personalized than just this kind of, minute dissective, so to speak, aspect of treating people. So, but of course, what I really love about your approach is almost like an opposite spectrum, so like so simple and so just, down to earth in a sense, right? So we've, experienced that in the caveman time, so to speak. But I mean, what do you think about, the current direction of the medicine towards this, personalized medicine versus just using what you suggested?
Well, I think personalized medicine has a place, but this idea that we have to have our genes tested to see what we should be eating, I think is misplaced. I mean, if you look at countries, in Asia, for example, 50 years ago, they had extremely low rates of pretty much all of our chronic diseases, and they start to eat like us and live like us, and then all too often die like us, And so, yes, for example, there are genetic variabilities in how efficiently, just to pick one example, somebody can metabolize dietary fat and cholesterol, right? Some people can eat almost anything and they're never going to get heart disease. That's one end of a bell curve. Those are the people who live to be 100 and they say, oh yeah, I eat 12 cheeseburgers for breakfast and a steak for lunch and a prime rib for dinner, and I smoke 10 packs a day. And you kind of look and they go, well, gosh, maybe diet's not that important. Look what they're eating, and they're 100. Except all the people who weren't that efficient at getting rid of all the fat and cholesterol and stuff, animal protein in their diet, never made it to 100. That's the kind of genetically lucky group of people. But the point is that even if you're not very genetically efficient at metabolizing dietary animal protein or refined carbohydrates or whatever, if you're not eating that many of them, then those genetic differences don't really matter. And so that's why I think that, it's just about radically simplifying. Steve Jobs was one of my closest friends for over 20 years. And he would tell me that he was more proud of what he left out of the iPhone than what he put in there. And, the idea is that it's a powerful supercomputer, but the interface is so simple that you can kind of go through all that complexity and just radically simplify it. So that's what I've tried to do here. Yeah, you can find out if you're genetically less efficient at getting rid of sugar in your diet. So if you are, then maybe that'll motivate you to eat less sugar. That's good. But, hopefully you'll be motivated to eat less sugar anyway, in which case then those differences really don't matter.
Oh, that's a great answer. Thank you so much. And of course, going back to you, Bob, and your question. So it's probably one of the best and easiest time to be vegetarian. So I started when I was 19. So I became, vegetarian. During my medical school, I became pescatarian. I couldn't be without some sort of protein, but and it was hard, so there were no, meat substitutes, so soy-based and otherwise. So, but now after that movie that you mentioned, so which is actually impressive. So my husband, was very much meat eater, so it really impressed him. So
yeah,
we're now vegan.
It's really good for meat eating. In fact, the film crew became vegan after shooting the erection scene. So that really gets guys' attention. Half of guys in their 50s have problems with erections. Have 60% of the guys in their 60s, 70% of the guys in their 70s. And so just knowing that alone can get a lot of guys to change their diet, not to live longer, but to live better.
It really did affect my husband. I mean, from being like, almost like 90% meat eater. So, now we are vegan pretty much,
Oh, he saw the movie. I didn't get that. Okay.
He did see that movie, and that's really affected him.
I'm glad to hear
and
that.
now, like, Bob, you mentioned that you love pizza, so my husband discovered this cauliflower-based crust pizza that is actually like so tasty. It's and unbelievable, so that you can actually do this.
It is interesting because I think, Irina, you touch on something that's important. It's not just the physical notion of eating something. Like, I love soda, I do. It's not, but there are a certain variety of cues that address it. It's the sound the escaping carbonation makes as you pop the tab. It's the sound of it going into a glass, or the sound of it. There's so many other psychological pieces to the overall picture. And the question I have, let's go back to the burger piece a minute. Have I tried a plant-based burger? I haven't. I should, and my wife would approve. And the question is, do I get the same sense of emotional enjoyment as I would get from a traditional burger?
Yeah, well,
is it satiating enough?
Yeah. I've been consulting with Ethan Brown of Beyond Meat to help them make a healthier version of their burger. But it is really good. And I grew up in Texas eating meat, 3 times a day, or more, Chili's, cheeseburgers, chalupas, whatever. And so I remember I became a vegetarian when I was 19 as well, but I still remember. And for people who have, it's a great transition food, because is it as healthy for you as eating, broccoli and tofu? No, but it's way better than for eating a regular burger. And especially if you put all the other stuff that you normally would put on a burger, then it becomes even almost indistinguishable. Just like, if you have these associations with drinking a soft drink, I grew up in Texas drinking Dr. Pepper. I figured if it's Dr. Pepper, it must be good for you, right? It's a doctor, but no, it's not. But, have a LaCroix or, a Perrier or something that has the things that are kind of emotionally satisfying, the way it sounds when you pop the tab, and the way the carbonation sounds when you pour it in a glass. It's going to be the same whether it's just carbonated water, or whether it's a soft drink or not, without the sugar. So I would say, try the Beyond Meat burger. It's really good. And let me know what you think.
I will.
And by the way, that was the meal, the plant-based meal that they served in the Game Changer scene to the guys who had 300 to 500% more erections, was a Beyond Burger chopped up into a burrito.
Yeah,
well, I will do that.
And that's what I kept telling Ethan. I said, why don't you do a whole campaign around this? Get away from this idea, like, Beyond Meat is good for your meat, or something like that. But anyway, I think he's actually going to do that. We'll see. I just spoke to him yesterday.
We'll zip over to Elizabeth Sticks, then we'll go with Mary Jo, then Vincent, and then we'll wrap things up. Elizabeth, you're up. You're on mute, dear.
Mute. That was actually my question. I was going to ask if the you can hear me. I just closed a bunch of windows by accident. Was if the fake meat and the Impossible Burger and Beyond Beef and the chicken substitutes, which I eat a lot of all that stuff, if that counts, if that does the trick, or if it's if they're nicer to animals and to the environment, but don't have the health impact.
Yeah, I mean, again, one of the ways to kind of broaden your question is
sorry, I'm so sorry. I did technology, everything went wrong.
It's that one of the in terms of finding meaning, my son is a 21-year-old musician who's really quite good. And one of his favorite indie bands is called Wolfpack. And we went to see them at the Greek Theater in Berkeley. This is about 2.5 years ago, right before COVID. And I went backstage to say hi to the front man is a vegan. And we were talking. He said, during my concerts, I usually go out and spend 10 or 15 minutes talking about why I'm on a plant-based diet. And I often talk about your work. So since you're here, why don't you do it? I said, what? You want me to go out in the middle of your concert and talk about why people should eat a plant-based diet? This is like 15,000 to 20,000 kids in there, between 19 and 22, like they're worried about heart disease, right? He said, yeah. I said, okay. So I did. And for 15 minutes, I was cool to my son. It didn't last more than that, but for 15 minutes. So I didn't talk about heart attacks and prostate cancer and strokes and diabetes. I said, look, it's so easy to feel overwhelmed, with all the problems the world is facing. Like, what can I do as one person about global warming, or feeding the hungry, or the deforestation in the Amazon, or things like that, or the 7 billion animals that are suffering every year that in these horrible conditions in factory farms? What can I do as one person to make a difference? Well, it turns out something as primal as what you put in your mouth every day affects all of those things. More global warming is caused by livestock consumption than all forms of transportation combined. It takes 14 times more resources to make a pound of meat-based protein than plant-based protein. So, you don't have to be a vegan, but just have a meatless Monday. Every time you choose not to eat meat, you're freeing up resources to help feed the hungry. There's enough food to feed everyone. No one need go hungry. I was on the board of directors of the San Francisco Food Bank a few years ago and learned that, it turns out that most of the deforestation of the Amazon is to clear cut land to graze cattle, and of course there are 7 to 11 billion, mammals, sentient beings that get these horrible lives. They just put in a pen, that's all their whole life, and then they get killed in these really awful ways. So, this is something you can do to make a difference. And so if you imbue your food choices with meaning, it makes it sustainable. And just like, I think all spiritual practices, all religions have dietary guidelines just about, and they're often in conflict with each other. This you can eat that, but not this, or certain days of the week, or certain times of day, or certain months of the year, whatever. But whatever the intrinsic benefit of eating or not eating certain foods, just the act of choosing not to eat certain foods can imbue those choices with meaning. Just like if you're in a monogamous relationship with your partner, why would you want to just have sex with only one person when you could have sex with lots of people? And the answer is that when you choose consciously, when both people choose to just do with one person, you create a sense of safety, and you can only open your heart and be intimate emotionally to the degree you feel safe, because when you're vulnerable, you can get hurt, and we've all been hurt. So it's like the heart goes, hey, it's not safe. But when you're with someone for a long time and you really can learn to trust that person, the trust isn't even really binary. It just deepens and deepens over time. And the more you trust you can, the more intimate it is. The more intimate it is, the more erotic it is. That's something I never knew. And so instead of having the same kind of experience with different people, you can have these infinitely variable erotic experiences with the same person. So then again, it's what you gain is so much more than what you give up. And it imbues those choices with meaning, which is really what makes them sustainable.
Actually, that was, am I not muted, right? That was wonderful. I was actually just specifically, I already eat mostly the fake meat. And I just wonder if I can get away with that, if I'm like thinking that I'm a vegetariarian. Really, I'm eating like a fatty, bad for you product that isn't really doing the dietary thing that you're recommending.
It depends what your goals are. It's a spectrum of choice. It's way better to eat Beyond Meat than regular meat. Not as good as eating,
for your body. It's better for your body.
It's better for your body to eat Beyond Meat than regular meat, for sure. Again, it's not just the fat versus carbs, it's the animal protein itself, which has been shown in so many studies to be so disease promoting.
Okay.
And so, but on the other hand, there are even healthier choices to eat. But if you eat as a treat, as opposed to something you eat every day or 2 or 3 times a day, then you'll be better off.
All right, we have 2 more questions and we'll wrap things up. We'll go to Mary Jo.
Can you see me okay?
I can hear you and see you more than okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Ornish. This has been amazing. I'm so excited to read your book, but I also have a quick question. So if you're looking to undo it and you're looking at the food that you eat, what would you recommend be the 5 things that we should be eating, the top 5, and what are the 5 things we should stop eating?
Well, I wrote a book before this one called The Spectrum, and it was based on the finding that I mentioned earlier, that the more you change, the more you improve. And also what we talked about earlier, where instead of calling foods good or bad, I just said some foods are just more helpful for you than others, but that's not a moral judgment. And so I categorize foods from group 1, the most helpful, to group 5, the least helpful, and say, find out where you are on the spectrum and say, how much are you willing to change? And not as like, do this and don't do that, but these are good foods or these are bad foods. Say, like, what are your goals and what do you want to do? So like somebody says, I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to get my LDL cholesterol down 50 points. I want to get my blood pressure down 10 points. I want to get my hemoglobin A1C down a couple points, whatever it is. That's different than like trying to reverse heart disease. If you have heart disease or a life-threatening condition, you really do need to go all the way to the healthiest end of the spectrum. But otherwise, again, what matters most is your overall way of eating and living. So say, okay, so what are you eating now? Well, I'm eating mostly unhealthy group 5 foods, the usual suspects, red meat and fried foods and donuts and whatever. How much are you willing to change? Wow, no one's ever asked me that. People always telling me what I should be eating. Okay, well, I'll eat less of that and more of the Groups 1 through 3, great. How much are you exercising? Not really very much. How much are you willing to do? Gosh, no one's ever asked me that. I'm always being told what to do. Okay, I'll walk 20 minutes every other day. Great. How much meditation and yoga are you doing? 0. How much are you willing to do? I'll meditate 10 minutes a day. How much love and support do you have? Not enough, but I'll spend more time with my friends and family. Great. We track it. We say, okay, a month later, we found, oh, you lost 6 pounds, but you haven't lost 10, or your cholesterol came down 30 points, but not 50. Look at how well you're doing. Now, if you just go a little bit further, eat more on the healthier end of the spectrum. Again, not everything is that way, but again, if you indulge yourself one day, eat healthier the next. You don't have time to meditate one day, do a little more the next, then you'll get where you're going. That's what I find to be the most useful.
Okay, thank you.
And Vincent, you get the last piece of the pie here. That may not be the right,
Yeah.
the wrong choice of
Dr.
words,
Ornish,
but
I
metaphorically,
Dr.
I think it'll work.
I am your biggest devotee. I woke up, I've been a diabetic 12 years. I had non-alcoholic sclerosis of the liver from overeating. My grandparents.
I'm sorry, you have what from overeating?
Non-alcoholic scrosis of the liver. I'm an Italian American.
You have
my
non-alcoholic.
grandparents were type 2 diabetics.
Got it.
My grandparents were type 2 diabetics. My parents were type 2 diabetics. Everyone in my family is obese, and I was overweight.
And you all probably eat the same way too, right?
Right. So, and Jim Hurd's on the phone, and I'm a scientist. So I woke up in the hospital at Bethesda on a ventilator with 3 tubes in my body after a 12-hour operation because I almost bled to death because I had a perforated stomach lining because I've had GERD for 30 years. I woke up on the ventilator and I was in there in the ICU for 5 days. And that's when I realized when I get out, I got to go to my diabetes doctor. And she was younger. And she said, Vincent, you're not going to live till you're 70. Here's Dean Ornish's book. You've got to stop. I've never eaten butter since. So I went from 250, I'm 220 now. My A1C was 8.4, now it's 5.8. I check my blood sugar 3 times a day. I haven't eaten pizza. I don't eat ice cream. I don't eat sausage. I don't eat meat. And I'm 65 the other day, and I'm going to live till I'm 80. And thank you. I from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, well, thank you for making my day. And again, this is why I love doing this work so much.
And my question was, for 45 years, I've heard that they don't teach nutrition and diet in medical school. And I keep hearing that. Are they finally teaching it in medical school?
Well, this will be the last thing we talk about. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that. It really is very, very meaningful to me. I'm on the nutrition working group of the American College of Cardiology. We published a paper last year in the leading cardiology journal that the average doctor in medical school gets 4 hours of nutrition training a year, which is not much. And even that, it's mostly about, like vitamin C and scurvy and stuff like that. The average cardiology in 4 years of cardiology fellowship gets none. So we have a ways to go, but that's why part of why I spent 16 years working with Medicare to get coverage for our program, because I realized if you change reimbursement, it not only changes medical practice, but even medical education. So it is changing. It's a slow process, as we talked about when we started this, is that, sometimes change occurs very slowly over time. As Martin Luther King, the article of justice, over what's a great quote as bends, but it takes a while sometimes. He said it much more eloquently. And so I'm encouraged, I choose to be, having been so depressed when I was younger, I choose to be as optimistic as I can, but I do see positive signs, but we still have a ways to go. So let me just say to each of you, and Bob, thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I so appreciate it again. Thanks to each of you for letting me share this. I hope at least some of it's been useful. If you have want more information about our work or our Alzheimer's study or our reversing heart disease programs, just go to ornish.com. And to me, awareness is always the first step in healing. So I'm grateful to you, Bob, for the chance, and to each of you to help raise awareness a little bit.
Good. Now I'll get the book plates out the next day. I want to thank everybody for being part of this. Leonard Maltin comes up next week, and we're going to fight about Academy Awards. And after that, we have a whole bunch of stuff that is set up. So come as you can, come as you are. And thank you very much for a great gathering, Dean.
Take care. All the
Thank
best.
you, Dean,
Thank
so
you,
much.
Dr.
Wonderful
Thank
meeting.
you.
Yes.
See you,
Thank
Bob.
you, Bob.
Thank you.
Yes, it was
Bye-bye.
great.
Take care now.